Good morning, evening, or night. Wherever you are, welcome to WHAM today. Take a deep breath, clear your mind, and let's drift through the whispers of today's world, one quiet thought at a time. As we wrap up Sunday, 15th June, 2025, let's see what stories are unfolding around us. Israel and Iran are locked in an escalating conflict, with both nations exchanging aerial attacks and suffering casualties, sparking fears of a larger regional war. Israel has targeted sites within Iran, including the Mashhad Hashemi Nejad airport in eastern Iran, where a refueling plane was reportedly destroyed, and an oil refinery in Tehran, causing significant fire. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has stated that Israel has been systematically dismantling Iranian defenses since last year. In response, Iran launched missile strikes on Israel, hitting Tel Aviv and the port city of Haifa, resulting in at least 10 deaths after missiles evaded Israeli defense system. The conflict has caused numerous casualties, including women and children whose identities have not been publicly released. Iran's foreign minister accused Israel of expanding the war by attacking a major gas facility in Bushehr province, warning of global repercussions. The attacks have also exposed Iran's lack of preparedness for war. Diplomatic efforts have been disrupted, leading to the cancellation of planned talks between Tehran and Washington regarding Iran's nuclear program. Despite this, U.S. President Donald Trump remains hopeful for a resumption of negotiations. Donald Trump vetoed an Israeli plan to kill Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, citing that Iran had not yet killed any Americans. The situation in Gaza and the Palestinian territories remains dire, with Israeli gunfire and airstrikes resulting in at least 41 deaths across Gaza on Sunday, including 5 near U.S.-backed aid sites. 13 starving Palestinians were killed while trying to obtain food near the Netzarim corridor and in Rafah's al-Mawasi area. Health officials reported that at least 8 Palestinians were killed and dozens wounded in a shooting near Israeli and U.S. supported food distribution points in the Gaza Strip. Witnesses reported that Israeli forces opened fire around dawn on crowds of Palestinians seeking aid in Rafah. Israeli forces have also sealed entrances to several cities and villages in occupied Palestinian territory. The escalating conflict has significant regional implications, with pleas for de-escalation seemingly ignored. Israel has extended its military actions beyond Iran, bombing Yemen and targeting a top Houthi military leader. The intensifying conflict has heightened fears of a protracted all-out war and widespread instability in the region. In the Netherlands, approximately 150,000 people participated in a red line protest in The Hague, organized by Oxfam, calling on the government to take stronger action against the war. G7 leaders are likely to urge Trump to keep the U.S. out of the conflict. The conflict has been met with frustration and helplessness, as well as heartbreak, in the United States. China is navigating a complex economic landscape, with May data suggesting that US tariffs are impacting manufacturing and exports, even as retail sales saw a 6.4% rise before a major online shopping festival, indicating moderate domestic consumption growth. To enhance government efficiency, officials will face new performance observers tasked with preventing wasteful spending on unproductive projects. Efforts are also underway to improve China's global image, particularly in the West, through increased cultural export. In technological news, Chinese scientists are advancing perovskite light-emitting diode technology, aiming to boost energy efficiency and luminosity in electronic devices, and they have also developed a novel carbide ceramic capable of withstanding extreme temperatures, potentially revolutionizing hypersonic flight. Militarily, China's nuclear arsenal is expanding rapidly, adding around 100 warheads annually since 2023, which could lead to it matching Russia or the US in ICBM capabilities by the end of the decade. The Chinese military conducted patrols in the South China Sea, cautioning the Philippines against joint patrols with nations outside the region, citing security risks. Foreign Minister Wang Yi has described Israel's attack on Iran as unacceptable and offered China's assistance in de-escalation through a constructive role in peaceful negotiation. Turning to Taiwan, the Commerce Ministry has placed Chinese chip makers, Huawei Technologies, and SMIC on its export control list, amidst escalating trade and technology tensions involving both China and the United States. Wang Huning, a high-ranking Chinese official, has called for both sides of the Taiwan Strait to oppose Taiwan independence and external interference, and to foster closer integration at a recent conference. In Hong Kong, China's Security Office is tightening its grip on dissent 5 years after President Xi Jinping enacted a security law, highlighted by recent raids. Shifting to the United Kingdom, China is reportedly considering lifting sanctions on UK parliamentarians, which were imposed in 2021 due to human rights concerns in Xinjiang, potentially signaling a thaw in relations between London and Beijing. Across the Pacific, the United States finds that the US-China trade truce has not resolved export restrictions on rare earth minerals, vital for military applications, potentially jeopardizing a comprehensive trade agreement. Taiwan's Commerce Ministry has added Chinese chip makers, Huawei Technologies, and SMIC to its export control list, amid increasing trade and technology friction with China and the United States. Meanwhile, in the Philippines, the Chinese military conducted patrols in the South China Sea, warning against organizing joint patrols with countries outside the region, claiming they raise security risks. Regarding Iran, China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi deemed Israel's attack unacceptable and urged de-escalation during a conversation with his Israeli counterpart Gideon Saar, offering China's constructive role in a peaceful resolution. In Israel, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi called Israel's attack on Iran unacceptable and urged de-escalation during a phone call with his Israeli counterpart Gideon Saar, offering China's constructive role in a peaceful resolution. Lastly, in Hiroshima, the diary of a teenage bomb victim, which includes a message from her father, who learned of her death upon returning from China after the war, was donated to the Hiroshima Museum. Australia largely believes China will overtake the US as the world's leading power by 2035, according to a Lowy Institute report. Trust in the US has dropped to a low of 36%, a level not seen since 2005. The Reserve Bank of Australia, RBA, will investigate the Australian Securities Exchange, ASX, after identifying repeated and serious failures that jeopardized market stability. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese and Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney met in Calgary, where Carney expressed appreciation for Australian firefighters' help with the wildfires in British Columbia and Alberta. At the G7 summit in Canada, Albanese will discuss enhanced security cooperation with EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and European Council President Antonio Costa, as Australia pursues formal membership in a new defence agreement with the European Union. A survey indicated Australians hold equal levels of distrust for both US President Donald Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping. An Australian poll also ranked New Zealand's Prime Minister Christopher Luxon as the global leader with the highest confidence rating for handling foreign affairs. The Trump administration's cuts to foreign aid caused a $400 million loss for Australian projects, affecting 120 initiatives, closing at least 20 offices, and disrupting critical support for health, education, humanitarian efforts, and climate change, according to the Australian Council for International Development, AFI. United States. The United States faces criticism from Chinese state media, which cites social divisions highlighted by protests during a military parade in Washington, D.C., marking the 250th anniversary of the U.S. Army and coinciding with President Donald Trump's birthday as evidence of its decline. Thousands of No King State protests were planned across the country in opposition to the Trump administration. 3 Pacific nations were added to President Trump's expanded travel ban list for allegedly failing to meet US requirements. Ryan Hass, director of the John L. Thornton China Center at the Brookings Institution, anticipates both Trump and they will engage in aggressive posturing while avoiding a complete breakdown in US-China relations. French President Emmanuel Macron openly criticized Donald Trump's expressed interest in acquiring Greenland. US Representative Rohit Khanna proposed a 21st century Marshall Plan to revitalize prosperity and unity within the USA. US President Donald Trump canceled a proposed military parade in 2018, citing excessive costs. US Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy, JNR, removed the Vaccine Advisory Panel of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, stating the move was to restore public trust. China's state media has proclaimed the decline of the United States, citing social divisions highlighted by protests during a military parade in Washington, D.C., marking the 250th anniversary of the U.S. Army and coinciding with President Donald Trump's birthday. An Australian survey revealed that Australians hold equal levels of distrust for President well and pained. And as President Donald Trump, Ryan Hass, director of the John L. Thornton China Center at the Brookings Institution, believes Trump and Xi will posture aggressively but avoid a complete collapse in US-China relations. The European Union is set to engage in formal negotiations with Australia to facilitate Australia's inclusion in a new defense agreement. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese will be present at the G7 summit in Canada, where he will engage in discussions with EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and European Council President Antonio Costa regarding enhanced security cooperation. French President Emmanuel Macron visited Greenland to express European solidarity following US President Donald Trump's takeover threats, thus emphasizing the solidarity of France and the EU. Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney expressed gratitude to Australian firefighters for their assistance in combating wildfires in British Columbia and Alberta during a meeting with Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese in Calgary. Hong Kong's chief executive, John Lee Ka-chiu, has extended an invitation to international students concerned about completing their studies at Harvard University in the U.S., offering them the opportunity to continue their education at universities within Hong Kong. France's President Emmanuel Macron openly criticized Donald Trump's threats to take over Greenland during a visit to the Arctic territory, conveying France's and the EU's solidarity, stating, "I don't think that's what allies do." New Zealand's Prime Minister Christopher Luxon has been ranked as the world leader with the highest confidence in handling foreign affairs, according to an Australian poll. Israel and Iran are locked in escalating conflict, defined by direct military actions and retaliatory measures. Israel commenced Operation Rising Lion on June 13th, targeting Iranian nuclear, missile, and military infrastructure. These strikes reportedly resulted in numerous deaths, including high-ranking Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, commanders like Hossein Salami, and atomic scientists. Brig. General Ahmed Vahidi has been appointed as Salami's replacement. Retaliating, Iran launched missile attacks on Israel, triggering air raid sirens and causing damage in residential areas. WHAM was among the affected areas, later visited by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Iran has characterized its actions as acts of self-defense. Despite the heightened tensions, U.S. President Donald Trump voiced optimism regarding potential peace between Iran and Israel, citing ongoing diplomatic efforts. The conflict has instilled considerable fear among Iranian citizens, particularly those residing in Tehran, who are apprehensive about further escalation. Amidst the ongoing conflict, Gaza is facing a severe humanitarian crisis. Shootings near food distribution points have resulted in the deaths of at least 8 Palestinians, with dozens more sustaining injuries. The situation is compounded by shortages of essential supplies and limited access to medical care, further exacerbating the suffering of the civilian population. International organizations are struggling to provide adequate assistance due to security concerns and logistical challenges. Turning to Canada, President Donald Trump's arrival for a Group of 7 summit puts him in the spotlight. The summit's main objective is to address concerns surrounding his policies and potentially influence his decisions on trade, climate change, and international cooperation. Discussions are expected to be tense, given the existing disagreements between the U.S. and other G7 nations on key issues. The summit represents a crucial opportunity for world leaders to engage in dialogue and seek common ground on pressing global challenges. India is grappling with multiple tragedies, including the devastating Air India crash in Ahmedabad that claimed 270 lives after the plane struck a medical college hostel shortly after takeoff. The remains of the victims are being identified and released to their families. Adding to the distress, a helicopter carrying Hindu pilgrims crashed in Uttarakhand, killing all 7 on board. And in Maharashtra, an iron bridge collapse at a tourist destination led to 2 fatalities and 32 injuries. In Pune, another bridge collapsed over the Indrayani River, resulting in at least 4 deaths and numerous injuries. India is also engaged in a geopolitical dance with Pakistan for influence in Afghanistan, following recent airstrikes against Pakistan in response to a militant attack in Kashmir. Foreign Minister Subramaniam Jaishankar has engaged in talks with the Taliban leadership. The United Kingdom is in mourning after the Air India crash in Ahmedabad, which claimed the lives of 53 British nationals. Gujarati communities in London have held vigils, with interfaith leaders offering support. British Gujaratis also gathered at the International Siddhashram Shakti Centre in London to mourn the victims. Ukraine has expressed openness to Indian mediation with Russia, hinting at a possible meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Zelensky at the upcoming G7 summit. In Canada, Australia is facing scrutiny following the death of Gaurav Kundi, an India-origin man, days after an attempted arrest where police allegedly knelt on his neck. Canada is hosting the Group of 7 G7 summit in Kananaskis, Alberta. World leaders are meeting amid rising global tensions, notably the expanding war in the Middle East and ongoing trade disagreements with the U.S. also. Canada and the United Kingdom have created a trade working group to advise their prime ministers. United Kingdom's Keir Starmer is working diplomatically to resolve the Middle East crisis before the G7 summit in Canada. He has spoken with Mark Carney about the Israel-Iran conflict and intends to speak with leaders from the US, France, and Germany. Starmer also announced a full statutory inquiry into grooming gangs, reversing his prior position while traveling to the G7 summit. The UK and Canada have established a trade working group to provide recommendations to their respective prime ministers. United States President Donald Trump is attending the G7 summit in Canada amid global tensions, including a widening war in the Middle East and ongoing trade disputes. Trump's policy of reducing the U.S.'s role as a global policeman has added to global instability. Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba of Japan hopes to negotiate a trade deal with Trump at the summit to eliminate trade tariffs that have harmed his country's economy. Japan's Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba is seeking a trade agreement with U.S. President Donald Trump at the G7 summit. He wants to convince Trump to remove trade tariffs that are hurting Japan's economy, a significant goal before upcoming elections. The Middle East crisis, particularly the escalating conflict between Israel and Iran, has surprised many world leaders. This follows recent strikes by Israel on Iran, with Tehran retaliating, indicating a more unstable global environment as the U.S. potentially scales back its international involvement. This escalating conflict is a significant concern as leaders meet at the G7 summit. Keir Starmer is undertaking diplomatic initiatives to address this crisis, consulting with Mark Carney and planning discussions with key global leaders. Japan is seeing hedge funds take advantage of investor enthusiasm fueled by corporate governance reforms and the end of deflation. Sumitomo Mitsui and SBI are creating a wealth management joint venture as Japan encourages individual investment in higher-risk assets. A retirement expert is counseling residents to evaluate income, investments, and interest rates amid rising prices. As the national election nears, Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba's minority government is prioritizing key policies. The cabinet's approval rating has risen to 37%, according to a Kyodo News survey. In May, cyber defense legislation was enacted. Prime Minister Ishiba will meet with U.S. President Donald Trump in Canada to discuss trade, aiming to reduce or eliminate tariffs. Itoin's U.S. expansion is being hampered by these trade policies. Japan is also considering the risks to its undersea cables. Kansai International Airport, KIX, in Osaka Bay is experiencing sinking issues. Brazil was recently visited by Japan's Princess Kako, who toured the Iguazu waterfalls at Foz do Iguazu. U.S. President Donald Trump will meet with Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba in Canada for trade negotiations. The U.S. expansion of Itoin is being hindered by President Trump's trade tariffs. Ukraine is facing continued Russian offensives in the Donbas region. The Kremenchuk oil refinery was targeted in the latest strikes. The remains of 1,200 Ukrainian soldiers killed in the conflict with Russia were returned as part of prisoner exchange agreements resulting from Istanbul talks. Russia, also a party to the Istanbul talks, returned the bodies of the Ukrainian soldiers. Furthermore, Moscow has joined Ankara and Beijing in condemning Israel's attacks on Iran. Turning to the United States, President Trump is pushing a foreign policy agenda before the G7 summit. This agenda includes reducing the country's military presence overseas. Simultaneously, he seeks to expand trade wars, a move that contrasts with his earlier calls for closer ties with Russia. Israel's recent attacks on Iran have sparked international backlash. Moscow, Ankara, and Beijing have all voiced their condemnation of the attack. Turkey has joined Russia and China in denouncing Israel's actions against Iran. China, similarly, has aligned with Russia and Turkey in condemning Israel's attacks on Iran. United Kingdom. Why? The UK is increasingly vulnerable to Chinese and Russian sabotage targeting undersea cables, warns the China Strategic Risks Institute, CSRI, report which deems the UK woefully unprepared. Keir Starmer has launched a national operation targeting grooming gangs, accompanied by a statutory inquiry into institutional failures, addressing sustained pressure on the Labour Party. In intelligence news, Blaise Maitrelli will become the first female head of MI6, succeeding Sir Richard Moore this autumn. The government is also under fire for proposed changes to disability welfare, with Rachel Reeves defending the review of criteria, despite calls to halt the cuts. Russia. Russia experienced a drone attack in its Tatarstan region, resulting in 1 death and 13 injuries, local officials have reported. Moscow has returned 12,200 war dead bodies to Ukraine, bringing the total return this week to 4,812, with plans to return an additional 6,000 bodies in the near future. The China Strategic Risks Institute, CRI, has also reported that Russia, alongside China, is escalating sabotage operations that target undersea cables. Ukraine has received 1,200 war dead bodies returned by Russia, bringing the total to 4,800. This week alone, as Moscow prepares to return an additional 6,000 bodies. China, according to a report by the China Strategic Risks Institute, CRI, is increasing its sabotage operations along with Russia, targeting undersea cables, posing a growing threat to nations like the UK. France's President Emmanuel Macron is actively pursuing diplomatic initiatives on multiple fronts. Macron intends to challenge President Trump's Iran strategy at the G7 summit in Canada. He seeks assurances regarding a ceasefire and Trump's influence over Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu. Demonstrating solidarity, Macron also visited Greenland. The visit aimed to shore up European political backing for Denmark and its semi-autonomous territory. This was in response to annexation threats made by U.S. President Donald Trump. The United States, under President Donald Trump, faces scrutiny over its foreign policy decisions. President Trump's Iran strategy is expected to be a key point of contention with European leaders at the G7 summit in Canada. Earlier, Trump's suggestion of annexing Greenland drew criticism and prompted a visit from French President Emmanuel Macron. France has stripped former President Nicolas Sarkozy of the Legion of Honor following his corruption conviction. The conviction relates to Sarkozy's illegal attempts to gain favors from a judge. President Emmanuel Macron cited the escalating conflict between Israel and Iran. He stated that this conflict made hosting a conference on Palestinian statehood unfeasible. The Philippines is at a crossroads concerning its strategy in the South China Sea, with the upcoming presidential election potentially shifting the current assertive approach under Ferdinand Marcos Jr. to a more diplomatic one. Social inequalities remain a persistent challenge in the Philippines, highlighted by a stark image of a woman living in a sewer in Makati City, bringing attention to the ongoing issue of homelessness. Historical anxieties continue to resonate, recalling the 1950s when rumors of a vampire caused widespread panic throughout the Philippines. Escalating tensions in the South China Sea saw joint military exercises between the Philippines and Japan, which triggered a response from the Chinese People's Liberation Army, PLA, in the form of patrols, as China perceives these drills as a provocation. Canada is significantly increasing its military spending, as Prime Minister Mark Carney seeks to bolster national defense and fulfill NATO obligations. This move is widely interpreted as an effort to decrease Canada's dependence on the United States for security. In the United States, the Trump administration is considering expanding its controversial travel ban. 36 additional countries may be added to the list, raising concerns about international relations and potential discrimination. Saudi Arabia executed journalist Sail al-Shehi after a 7-year prison sentence. He was convicted on charges of terrorism and treason. Moving to Brazil, the government is facing increased scrutiny over its environmental policies. Deforestation in the Amazon rainforest has reached alarming levels. International organizations are calling for stronger measures to protect the rainforest. In the United States, the debate over immigration policy continues to intensify. Congress is struggling to find common ground on border security and pathways to citizenship. President Biden is facing pressure from both sides of the political spectrum. Turning to France, President Macron is pushing for pension reforms despite widespread protests. The proposed changes would raise the retirement age. Unions are vowing to continue their strike action until the reforms are withdrawn. In the latest from Australia, the government announced new measures to combat climate change. The plan includes investments in renewable energy and a commitment to reduce emissions. Critics say the measures don't go far enough to meet the country's climate goals. China's President Xi Jinping will attend a summit in Kazakhstan, signaling Beijing's commitment to deeper relations with Central Asian countries. The summit's agenda includes bolstering transport infrastructure, energy collaboration, security cooperation, and the digital economy's growth. In the United States, the Asian community, particularly Filipino Americans, is facing increased anxiety due to immigration raids. These raids are part of President Trump's stricter immigration enforcement policies. Mexico is currently witnessing debates surrounding proposed constitutional reforms that would allow for the popular election of judges, a move championed by President Andrés Manuel López Obrador's Morena party. This initiative has sparked controversy, with critics arguing it could undermine judicial independence and further concentrate power within the executive branch. Concerns are mounting that the reforms could erode democratic checks and balances, particularly given the Morena Party's supermajority in Congress, enabling them to potentially push through such changes despite opposition. The voter turnout and public sentiment surrounding these judicial reforms will be critical indicators of Mexico's democratic trajectory. Turning to Canada, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's government is facing increasing pressure to address rising inflation and housing costs, particularly affecting younger generation. The Liberal government is navigating economic challenges while simultaneously grappling with demands for increased social spending on healthcare and climate change initiatives. Recent polls suggest a decline in public approval, prompting speculation about potential policy shifts or cabinet reshuffles to regain political momentum. The upcoming budget will be a key test of the government's ability to balance fiscal responsibility with social priorities. Nicaragua mourns the loss of Violeta Berrios de Chamorro, who passed away at the age of 95. As the nation's former president in the 1990s, she became the first woman to hold such a high office in Central America. Her presidency was marked by efforts to stabilize the country amidst significant political challenges. Turkey recently experienced a tragic hot air balloon accident in its central region, claiming the life of the pilot and injuring 19 Indonesian tourists. Shifting focus to legal matters, Turkey has introduced legislation empowering the Diyanet, the nation's Directorate of Religious Affairs, to regulate Quran translation. The Diyanet can now censor versions that diverge from its established Islamic interpretation, raising questions about religious freedom and potential limitations on diverse theological perspectives within the country. Guinea is preparing for significant political change as the ruling military Shan creates a dedicated body to manage a series of crucial elections. This new institution will be responsible for the organization and oversight of a constitutional referendum, paving the way for both general and presidential elections in the future. Turning our attention to Papua New Guinea, law enforcement in Port Moresby conducted a raid on a hotel room, leading to the arrest of 5 individuals. Among those apprehended were 2 police officers, raising concerns about potential internal corruption and the integrity of law enforcement within the region. The arrests stemmed from an operation targeting methamphetamine, highlighting ongoing challenges related to drug control. Germany observed its inaugural Veterans Day with commemorative events held in Berlin and nationwide, honoring the service and sacrifice of its military personnel. Transitioning to the world of sports, the FIFA Club World Cup is currently underway in the United States. Bayern Munich showcased its dominance by defeating Auckland City with a resounding 10-0 victory in their opening Group C match held in Cincinnati. Peru was struck by a 5.6 magnitude earthquake off its central coast. The quake rattled Lima and Callao. The USGs confirmed the earthquake caused at least one fatality. 5 people were also reported injured in the aftermath. Egypt's borders remained closed to activists intending to join the global march to Gaza, as authorities prevented their passage to the Rafah crossing. Simultaneously, Cairo is seeing a surge in interest from Chinese manufacturers exploring relocation options amidst global trade tensions, evidenced by increased occupancy in guest houses catering to Chinese visitors like Jia House. Angola is currently experiencing unease among some citizens due to the relocation of 8 Mennonite families from Mexico, raising fears of potential displacement. Cambodia has formally requested the World Court's intervention to mediate its unresolved border disputes with Thailand. Conversely, Thailand prefers direct, bilateral discussions and does not acknowledge the World Court's authority in this particular matter. Indonesia's government is weighing the possibility of legalizing gambling to boost state revenue. This proposal is facing pushback due to strong cultural objections to gambling within the country. Israel was targeted by ballistic missiles launched by Yemen's Houthi rebels in a joint operation with Iran, with the Houthis claiming responsibility for the attack on Jaffa amidst heightened regional tensions. Italy, Portugal, and Spain are witnessing increasing protests led by activists drawing attention to the negative consequences of mass tourism. Activists cite rising housing costs, environmental damage, and the displacement of local populations as key concerns. Spain is bracing for major anti-tourism demonstrations fueled by overcrowding and severe housing shortages. Kazakhstan is hosting Xi Jinping for meetings with Central Asian leaders, a visit that coincides with the G7 summit taking place in Canada. Niger has experienced a jihadist attack that resulted in 9 fatalities, as reported by local sources. In a separate incident, the Nigerian army announced that it had eliminated 13 terrorists during operations targeting illegal gold mining sites in Tegi between June 8 and 14. Nauru has seen arrests made following cyber info-stealing incidents. Singapore is actively encouraging physical activity among its older citizens, promoting sports like flipperball, as demonstrated by teams like the Alma flipperball team. The United States Trump administration is contemplating an expansion of deportation operations targeting major urban centers, including Los Angeles and New York City. And that's a wrap for today's news, because even headlines need a nap. Stay curious, stay kind, and let the noise fade as you find your quiet. Take care, stay awesome, and I'll see you next time on WHAM today.